Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Chamunitira Vanachari Chamunitira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Chamunatira Vanachari Chamunitira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Chamunatira Vanachari Chamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhi Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupatra Mahams Pirvajakacharyas Chatarashita Shishimad Abhai Chana Lavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Raj Srila Prabhupada Ki. This can be founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki. Shri Guru Parampara Ki. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki. Kantra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Namaskar Krishna Sri Shanti. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leela Amrita, chant Hare Krishna and fight. Prabhupada said it was regrettable that scholars and politicians pretend to be students of Bhagavad Gita without even knowing the difference between the body and the owner of the body. They do not even know the first lessons of Bhagavad Gita. So what is the solution? Asked Mr. Koshi. Solution, Prabhupada shouted, you learn it. But they don't want to do it, said Mr. Koshi. Then they will have to go to hell, said Prabhupada. What can be done? If you want to cut your own throat, you can do it. Who can save you? But our duty is to say, don't commit suicide. Mr. Koshi made a case for drinking tea and coffee. He could not see how such things were sinful. Prabhupada explained that they were intoxicants. But they are several million like me, said Mr. Koshi. Millions of zeros does not mean one, said Srila Prabhupada. Zero is zero. Even if there are 7 million zeros added together, you cannot make one. Mr. Koshi also wanted to ask why Prabhupada paid so much attention only to Krishna, since there were hundreds of gods in the pantheon, but Prabhupada stopped in short. Mr. Koshi asked about the brainwashing controversy. There are so many accusations, said Prabhupada, but now it is in the court. But you don't require recognition of any court, do you? Asked Mr. Koshi. You require, replied Prabhupada, laughing. I don't require, you require. Yes, until then, said Mr. Koshi, there is doubt. Because you are after the court, said Prabhupada, after the judges. We are not after anyone. We are after one, Krishna. That's all. We know what our duty is. Srila Prabhupada further explained that opposition was coming in America because so many young people were taking to Krishna consciousness. Young men are taking it, said Prabhupada. They are preaching. They have sacrificed their lives. So they are intelligent persons. They can understand that they should not die. Krishna consciousness is not an old man's recreation. No, said Mr. Koshi, but you are responsible for it. I am not, said Prabhupada. Krishna is responsible. I am just distributing. My duty is to distribute. My duty is to distribute. That's all. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, Text 15. Okay, I'll just read through the Sanskrit myself, and then we can do the word for word together. Kvachidasadya griham davavat priyata viduram asukodakam shokagnina dayamano brisham nivedam upagachati. Please repeat. Kvachit, sometimes. Asadya, experiencing. Griham, the home life. Davavat, exactly like a blazing fire in the forest. Priya artha viduram, without any beneficial object. Asukha udarakam, resulting only in more and more unhappiness. Shoka agnina, by the fire of lamentation. Dayamana, being burned. Vrisham, very great. Nirvedam, disappointment. Upagachati, he obtains. Translation. In this world, family life is exactly like a blazing fire in the forest. There is not the least happiness, and gradually one becomes more and more implicated in unhappiness. In household life, there is nothing favorable for perpetual happiness. Being implicated in home life, the conditioned soul is burned by the fire of lamentation. Sometimes he condemns himself as being very unfortunate, and sometimes he claims that he suffers because he performed no pious activities in his previous life. Please repeat. In this world, family life is exactly like a blazing fire in the forest.
Family life is exactly like a blazing fire in the forest.
There is not the least happiness,
There is not the least happiness,
and gradually one becomes more and more implicated in unhappiness.
and gradually one becomes more and more implicated in unhappiness.
In household life,
In household life,
there is nothing favorable for perpetual happiness.
there is nothing favorable for perpetual happiness.
Being implicated in home life,
Being implicated in home life,
the conditioned soul is burned by the fire of lamentation.
the conditioned soul is burned by the fire of lamentation.
Sometimes he condemns himself
Sometimes he condemns himself
as being very unfortunate,
as being very unfortunate,
and sometimes he claims
and sometimes he claims
that he suffers
that he suffers
because he performed no pious activities in his previous life.
because he performed no pious activities in his previous life.
Report by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. In the Gurvashtaka, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has sung, Sangsara Davanala Lida Loka Tranaya Karunya Ganaganatvam. A life in this material world is exactly like a blazing forest fire. No one goes to set fire to the forest, yet the fire takes place. Similarly, everyone wants to be happy in the material world, but the miserable conditions of material life simply increase. Sometimes a person caught in the blazing fire of material existence condemns himself, but due to his bodily conception, he cannot get out of the entanglement, and thus he suffers more and more. Omagyanatamarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam yena tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Tadati Swapatantikam Vamdeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagojatam Sahaganavaganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaidim Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shivashakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabando Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindarbhyevicha Paritanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this purport reminds me of the present condition of the leaders of the world, the leaders of the global economy, the leaders of the planet that we live on, or the leaders of the nations on this planet. Because here it says, sometimes a person caught in the blazing fire of material existence condemns himself. So, due to a gradual realization of the predicament that all the nations and all the political leaders are in now, due to many different global catastrophes and emergencies, the realization is actually rising in the minds of the people and in the leaders of the people that they don't really have a solution. And here in the verse, it said that sometimes the family man condemns himself as being very unfortunate, and sometimes he claims that he suffers because he performed no pious activities in his previous life. So that realization is now kind of dawning on people. Not that people, in general, people don't believe in reincarnation. They don't ascribe their present suffering to previous negligence in another life. But at least now, political commentators and leaders are understanding that the whole nature of the economic system, which has been adopted by the so-called developed nations of this world, is in itself the cause of most of the catastrophes on the planet in terms of war, which is usually due to poverty, and poverty which is due to lack of food, which is due to like improper use of the land, and also it's due to pollution, and it's due to, well, we don't know what the cause of climate change is really, but we do know that it's exacerbated by pollution and by excessive burning of the Earth's resources. So now there's a lot of general acknowledgement that many of the present catastrophes are due to the negligence which was there in previous generations, and that because of the tendency just to exploit the resources of the planet for temporary gain, and temporary gain just for one's own extended family, be that like a tribe or a nation or a big business, an oligarchy or a monopoly, but just like a vested interests of whatever form they take have in the name of capitalism and in the name of economic advancement or of economic development, in the name of these kind of philosophies which were more or less went unquestioned for several hundreds of years, then now we're condemning ourselves as being very unfortunate, and we're kind of acknowledging that there's no one else to blame other than ourselves. But just as here, the living entity, even though he comes to that realization that he's to blame for his suffering due to excessive attachment for material prosperity, even though he comes to that realization, Srila Prabhupada says, but due to his bodily conception, he cannot get out of the entanglement, and thus he suffers more and more. And that's what we can see now, that even though there's an understanding, like and an acknowledgement, both by scientists, journalists, and politicians, of the cause of wars and poverty and mental illness and so many violence and moral degradation, even though there's an understanding of that the cause has been actually excessive economic greed. And even though they meet together to have lots of conferences about how to mitigate the problem, they're not able to do so because of their bodily conception. They cannot get out of that entanglement. Actually, there are people who could do it, but they're afraid that the general mass of people would rebel. Politicians have to promise sense gratification in one form or another to the mass of people. That's the only way they can remain in power. So it's and all of the great political commentators and all of the great thinkers, philosophers, and truly great leaders, in the sense of persons who are really willing to sacrifice their own gratification for the well-being of others, they all actually they actually understand the solution, but or at least they understand that there appears to be a solution, but it never works. It may work for a short time. If a leader is very powerful, he may be able to convince the mass of people to forego sense gratification for some higher cause. But it doesn't last. It doesn't last until the next generation don't have that conviction, or they don't remember how bad things were before. So they don't take the moral prescriptions seriously, and things just go back down again into degradation. And this is because those leaders, those political leaders, or those social leaders, they don't actually understand the root cause of that tendency to enjoy. And that the root cause of that tendency to enjoy is the misdirected lust, or the misdirected love for Krishna being directed to love for the material body. So the living entity, we're all Tatashta Shakti. That means we're all situated on the... Tatashta literally means situated on the bank between the spiritual and the material oceans, you could say. It's described that sometimes when a very big river comes forcefully down into the sea, it kind of churns up the silt and sand from the bottom of the ocean, and it creates some temporary sandbanks. So, and that's like at the junction between the river and the ocean. So we're the living entity. So for that reason, the living entity is described as Tatashta Shakti, that we're situated on that boundary between the spiritual ocean and the material rivers, and the torrential rivers of the material energy. And we have the dormant potency to invest all of our determination in either serving the material energy or serving the spiritual energy. We can't remain in a neutral situation. So that so these great political leaders, people like Fidel Castro or Napoleon even, and anyway, Gandhi, who could understand that due to excessive sense gratification, people were putting excess pressure on the resources of a nation, and therefore, due to great personal self-sacrifice, and also being able to speak in very powerful ways, they can convince people, okay, so instead of investing all of your energy in material gratification, just become renounced and invest your energy in the future well-being of this state. That's their concept. They're thinking that is the solution, but it's not. That is still investing all of your energy in the material. And if we invest all of our energy in the material, it just fuels that material conditioned conviction that we are the material energy, that we are part of the material energy. So any attempt just to change or manipulate the activities of the living entities to another kind of material lifestyle, even if it's the topmost material moralistic lifestyle, even if people are completely devoted to serving their country, their family, their nation, the planet, the oceans, all the living entities, even if people are completely altruistic, it cannot change that constitutional material lust in the heart. So Srila Prabhupada, for that reason, Srila Prabhupada was always completely uncompromising with whoever came to suggest that what he was teaching was unrealistic. Anyone who suggested that that the real solution is like anyone who suggested that by in any way manipulating the material lifestyle could bring about peace or happiness or equality, he would just immediately reject it. He said the duty of the devotee is to inject the spiritual knowledge into the dull brains of the materialists. And this is the dull brain of the materialist, that although he's a person caught in the blazing fire of material existence condemns himself, but due to his bodily conception, he cannot get out of the entanglement, and thus he suffers more and more. So the brain is dull because it's been starved. It's been starved of like spiritual nourishment for many, many lives. So the brain has become dull. It's become unresponsive. So Srila Prabhupada found this, that people were not able to respond positively to the messages of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and therefore he understood that there had to be like a program of gradual revitalization of the consciousness and the mind of the living entities, and therefore he stressed prasadam distribution, mass book distribution, Harinam, and regular chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra on beads, japa meditation. And these are all remedial measures for reviving the ability of the living entity to understand the spiritual message of Krishna. So it's, sometimes people talk about the present generation of young people, what they call the indigo. Has anyone heard this? The indigo generation, yeah? When they were born, those born in, around about the turn of the century or the turn of the millennium, that some people suggest that there's a generation of young people now who are like coming into the leadership positions in big businesses and in education and in politics, and that these children are like more enlightened in some way than the previous generation. And it seems to be the case in one sense, in terms of being conscientious about the environment and about things like veganism and and lack of prejudice in terms of race and gender. So that seems to be there to some degree, but they still fall into the category of what Krishna calls Maya Pratigyana. Even though they may be highly intelligent and even materially sensitive to people's suffering, that sensitivity and that knowledge is of no value, because it's still encouraging people to take shelter of the material energy, which will eventually lead to frustration and to violence towards others, violence towards oneself. So the Bhagavatam, and throughout the whole of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the pure devotees of Krishna like Narada Muni and Shukadev, Vidura, Prahlad, Dhruva Maharaj, they're describing this process of Harinam Sankirtan, that this process is the means by which the greatly entangled living entity can become nourished again by the mercy of Krishna and be able to transform their material lust into love for Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada's created this international society for Krishna consciousness by which we can associate with pure devotees. So we're reading Bhagavatam every day. We're associating with pure devotees. We're associating with Maharaj Parikshit, Shukadeva Goswami, Narada Muni, Lord Brahma. We're reading the Chaitanya Charitamrita. We're associating with Lord Chaitanya and all of his associates. We're reading Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita. We're associating with pure devotees in these ways. But once Srila Prabhupada was asked, how many pure devotees are there in your movement? And Srila Prabhupada asked one of his disciples, how many devotees do we have in ISKCON? And the devotee said, 1,000. Srila Prabhupada said, then there are 1,000 pure devotees. Because there's two, sometimes we equate the expression pure devotee with an Uttama Adhikari. An Uttama Adhikari is a person who never forgets Krishna at any time and sees everything in the material world as being a manifestation of Krishna's energy, and sees Krishna personally present everywhere. So that's, such a person is a pure devotee, but there are other pure devotees who are not on that level of topmost Mahabhagavat devotees. So Srila Prabhupada, so it's understood that another pure devotee is someone who may still have the tendency to be dragged into a material conception, but has pure faith that the process they've adopted, the process of chanting Hare Krishna, the process of coming to have darshan of the deities, the process of assisting in making nice offerings to Krishna, that this process will actually is purifying them and is taking them to the supreme destination, to the lotus feet of Krishna. So these devotees with pure faith, they're also pure devotees. And so we have, we're surrounded by such pure devotees here at Karuna Bhavan. Devotees who've devoted all of their mental and physical energy into serving Srila Prabhupada's mission. So these are pure devotees, and by taking their association and serving them and inquiring from them how we can also adopt and learn to be completely dedicated to the service of Krishna, then we're assured of attaining the goal. And then we can also help anyone else who comes in contact with us here in this embassy of the spiritual world. So just like in most developed countries, then they have many different embassies or consulates. They have, the American embassy, the German embassy, the French embassy. So here at Karuna Bhavan, this is the Vaikuntha embassy, or it's the Shvetadweep embassy, it's the Gokula embassy, it's the it's the embassy of all of the different holy dhams. And as long as we follow the rules of that embassy, then we're actually in the spiritual world. Although due to our conception, we may not have the full realization of that. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments? Is there anything online? It was nice actually to hear that the Bhaktas have been giving class every Tuesday. I'm sorry I'm not able to come. But I know Felix was telling me about the verse he gave class on yesterday, which is one of my favorite verses from the first canto. And it's in the first chapter of the first canto where where Sri Goswami and Shaunaka and the rishis where the sages are asking Sri Goswami to explain what is the means by which the living entities can be delivered in Kali Yuga. There's a whole series of verses. Starting from text 10, or no, text 9. Explain to us in an easily understandable way what you have ascertained to be the absolute and ultimate good for the people in general. In this iron age of Kali, men have but short lives. They are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed. That's everyone. Everyone is quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, always disturbed, including us as well. But we're not unlucky. Now, we're not misguided. We might still be a little bit lazy. And we're not very quarrelsome, are we? We're not very quarrelsome. We don't often hear many quarrels here. Actually, it would be nice to have more quarrels about Krishna's pastimes and about, not in a bad way, but more discussions and more. It's nice that Felix and Ian like to listen to lots of Krishna Katha, like Indradyumna Maharaj, Dinabandhu, Kartik Chaitanya Maharaj. And there's so if you're ever feeling like you like a good quarrel, then you can go and see them, and like, because there's always some differences of opinion about Krishna's pastimes. So there you go. So we're not misguided. We're living in the association of pure devotees. We're definitely not unlucky. We're extremely lucky. We're extremely fortunate. And we're not always disturbed. Yeah, we're not always disturbed. We're actually, due to Srila Prabhupada's amazing self-sacrifice, he's created these embassies of the spiritual world throughout this planet. So we don't have to think about, or is there a better way? There must be a better way to live than this. No, this is the best way to live. We haven't quite perfected it yet. Perhaps we haven't. We may still be a little disturbed that we're not able to contribute as much as the pure devotees can. So that's okay. It's okay to be a little bit disturbed in that way. That kind of disturbance is okay. So that's kind of humility. And that kind of disturbance will actually generate our ability to pray with sincerity to Krishna to help us. There's actually Raghunath Prabhu who encouraged me to learn some prayers to the holy name. It's described by Srila Prabhupada that if we consider that we're committing offenses when we're chanting, if we're being inattentive, or if we have a tendency to think about our own desires when we're chanting, if we get distracted, then it's described that if you recite some prayers which glorify the holy name, then this is actually not only, it's not that it counteracts the offenses, but it attracts Krishna's mercy, attracts Krishna's special mercy. So I've been learning these nice verses written by Srila Rupa Goswami called the Namashtakam, which are 8 prayers glorifying the holy name. And there's one in particular that I really, really like. It's the 5th verse of the Namashtakam. And it's Agadamana, Yashodanandana Nandana Suno, Kamalanayana Gopi Chandra Vrindavanendra. Pranata Karana Krishna Pranata Karana Krishna Vaneka Swarupe Mama Rati Uchai Mama Twayi Mama Rati Uchai Vadatam Nama Dea. So this is a prayer to Krishna that our attraction to Krishna in the form of his holy names can greatly increase. So if we're feeling disturbed that we're not able to surrender fully in the way that we see more advanced devotees around us doing, then rather than lament like in the verse that we've heard today about the man suffering in the blazing forest of material existence, he understands his situation, but due to bodily conception of life, he can't change. So we have I know personally I have a tendency to adopt that negative mentality. When I perceive that I'm not able to make the surrender that I see others making, I just have a tendency to become negative and think, oh, well, I've never surrendered before, so how is it going to make any difference now? But no, the process is the process is purification needs to take place. So that disturbance or that realization of our inability to make the surrender that is actually asked of us, that realization should inspire us to adopt the process. And the process is chanting and hearing Krishna's pastimes, offering prayers. And that process works. It may not work as fast as we want it to work, but it does actually work. So rather than getting frustrated and hitting your head against a brick wall, then let's take the process. So I'll stop there now. Sorry, yeah.
I wanted to comment on the last part of it. So sometimes he claims that he suffers because he performed no pious activities in his previous life. And obviously because the translations are as they are, this is suggesting that they claim that it's because of previous lives, but actually people aren't looking to how they're living now so much. And this was bringing contemplation to me about how previous perspectives might have been, for example, that global warming and this sort of thing is happening as a result of the cars and factories and all of this sort of thing. But with recent research and statistics, it actually shows that animal agriculture is responsible for I think maybe 80%, whereas these other industries that were previously blamed is something like 20%. And so actually this was then also leading onto a train of thought for me, having lived through the New Age movement and hippie lifestyle and come right through that, trying to help people in a sentimental way. Actually realizing that, like in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it talks about how the ball of Dharma is only left on one leg, and so people aren't realizing so much that their current irreligiosity is actually, with the cow slaughter and the treating, no cow protection at all, it's actually exploitation and all of this. The last leg that's left is truth. And so that's why it's so important that we don't try to water the leaves and sentimentally help people, but actually to water the roots, to bring the holy name, to bring the truth, and all of this is the only way. And I just thought it's quite nice to just pick up on that word of claims, because it's actually not just that, it's for people to look at what's happening in their lives right now and take responsibility for how they can make a positive change.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I mean, now, yes, thank you very much for bringing up the point. I mean, as you say in that chapter in the first canto, the punishment and reward of Kali, then here, this is in Canto 1, chapter 17, text 3. Yes, so Srila Prabhupada says, the cow's calf not only is beautiful to look at, but also gives satisfaction to the cow, and so she delivers as much milk as possible. But in the Kali Yuga, the calves are separated from the cows as early as possible, for purposes which may not be mentioned in these pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. The cow stands with tears in her eyes. The Shudra milkman draws milk from the cow artificially, and when there is no milk, the cow is sent to be slaughtered. These greatly sinful acts are responsible for all the troubles in present society. People do not know what they are doing in the name of economic development. The influence of Kali will keep them in the darkness of ignorance. Despite all endeavors for peace and prosperity, they must try to see the cows and bulls happy in all respects. Foolish people do not know how one earns happiness by making the cows and bulls happy, but it is a fact by the law of nature. Let us take it from the authority of Srimad Bhagavatam and adopt the principles for the total happiness of humanity. Srila Prabhupada wrote that in India, so he hadn't come to America when he wrote that. And cows are treated extremely badly in India as well. But so, partly due to the hippie movement, the vegan movement, then people have put pressure on the GBC and of ISKCON to really get it together and to start to fulfill Srila Prabhupada's desire for cow protection. So now we're in the process of seriously adopting cow protection here at Karunabhav, and it will happen, in fact, within the next couple of years. I mean, unless there's going to be like some major societal collapse, and it will be a great opportunity to present all of the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a very big subject, but thank you for bringing it up. Srila Prabhupada was convinced that way of life, just depending on the cows and the bulls for farming and for transport and for medicine and living off the land, he was convinced that this was necessary, and that without that lifestyle, people wouldn't be able to adopt en masse Krishna consciousness. But even if it's not possible, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't go ahead and preach the Srimad Bhagavatam. In other places, Srila Prabhupada would say that in the past, the householders gained their wealth to maintain their family from cows and from the land. Now people gain their wealth by going to the office. And whichever way you do it, it doesn't prevent you from bringing up your family in Krishna consciousness. So, there are devotees who are taking on the responsibility of establishing cow protection. Unless we're directly involved in that process, we don't need to divert our energy to it at the present time. But it's good that we can read these chapters as you described, so that we can prepare ourselves to be able to present the whole culture of the Srimad Bhagavatam, so that when people see the sense of the cow protection culture, then they see that as part of the bigger culture or part of the spiritual culture. So let's keep ourselves healthy and happy so that we can be around for that exciting development in the life of the Karuna Bhavan community.
That's one really quick question as well.
Yeah.
At the beginning. So regarding a personality like His Grace, Vasi, he's a householder. He had children. He was a prominent figure in society, and so can you just explicitly explain the difference, just briefly, between the example that he gives and what it's saying here, so about household life, because obviously he provides an example. Is it purely that he's pure devotee, obviously? Well, actually, isn't Janasena is a manjari?
Well, anyway, whether he is a manjari, but even the eternal Nityasiddha devotees of Krishna who come to the material world, then Krishna arranges for them to have a difficult life. So that nobody can say, oh well, he's a Nityasiddha devotee, it's easy for him. So the difference is that he wrote many songs. He expressed the nature of his devotion in many of his songs. And in one song he says, Mansa deho geho yoki chamo apilantua padinanda kishore. My wealth, my home, my family, my children, they have no value outside of them being your eternal devotees. I offer them all to you because they were never mine in the first place. They're yours, and you've given them to me to look after. So the life of a pure devotee and the life of an entangled householder may have superficially appear to be the same, but the pure devotee is if he receives some inspiration from Krishna, he can give up that family completely, knowing that Krishna will look after them because they're Krishna's devotees. And sometimes it seems extremely ruthless. Sometimes it seems really like we can't let the non-devotees know about this. They'll think that we're like completely sort of ruthless, callous, cold people. I mean, there's one devotee, Vasi Das Babaji Maharaj, and when his wife had given birth to a child who was only 6 months old, then he left home and never came back again. And he abandoned the family were exceptionally poor. I mean, he was exceptionally poor as well. They were literally starving, and he just left the whole family behind and spent the rest of his life living a life of renunciation in Vrindavan. But there's no doubt that he didn't spend his life feeling guilty about doing that, and that he knew that the best thing for everyone, that whatever you want to do for others, if you surrender your life to Krishna, you can't do any more than that. because then you're actually an instrument to act exactly according to Krishna's direction. And I hope that helps in some way.
Yeah, thank you. And I was also thinking it just highlights the importance of the spiritual master and that example, because otherwise people can think, oh, Krishna's telling me to do this, and actually not be receiving any kind of guidance. Because we have the example of Sri Prabhupada, for example, that obviously he's leading by example, but he was saying that he would have left his family immediately and followed his spiritual master, but it would have been an injustice. And that it was only so many years later when his family was secure and stable. But then it's obviously dependent upon each individual case, and so we can't speculate that we're receiving the guidance without actually turning to somebody that's more qualified as a spiritual master to guide us.
Yeah. Srila Prabhupada initiated devotees very early on in their spiritual life. He really established this principle of surrender right at the beginning. Because he wanted devotees to have a taste that Krishna is protecting me. And he's not just protecting me, he's protecting everyone. And that if I become Krishna's devotee, then only then can I help people, because only then can I be an instrument in Krishna's hands. But in terms of accepting a spiritual master, and in terms of having complete faith that just following the spiritual master's instructions, then the best outcome will be obtained. To have that faith in Kali Yuga is a very rare thing. It's not an easy faith. It's not easy to attain that level of faith. And but so even if we haven't got a spiritual master who we've surrendered to and we've accepted initiation from, Srila Prabhupada says, if you read my books and you really take them to heart, then you're initiated into the sampradaya in that sense, and then actual diksha is a formal recognition of that initiation. So when you read Srila Prabhupada's books, and if you feel like really grasped by his love for Krishna and his conviction and his compassion, when you feel that like surrender in your heart, that you want to devote your life to this, then that is actually initiation. But out of respect for Srila Prabhupada's desire, then we should adopt the process by which we can be accepted formally within the institution. So we should so when we feel that we have that level of conviction, then we should inquire, okay, so how can I now formalize that? It's our duty to do that. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your questions. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Sai Gaura Premanandi.